من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولينصرن الله من ينصره إن الله لقوي عزيز الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر ولله عاقبة الأمور آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our discussion yesterday was to enter in to the beginning of the specifics in regards to the Thaqalain and the principles presented by the Thaqalain in overcoming the global challenges that face us in the world today. In previous nights, we mentioned that it is necessary for us to return back to the Sunnah of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and that the examples, the precedents, the principles that are laid within the Holy Thaqalain should be where you and I extrapolate the world that we want to create from. We looked at his Sunnah, and we noticed that his Sunnah in liberating his society was divided into two forms. The first one was to bring his community forward stage by stage and to liberate them through their own institutions and through their practices for them to arrive in becoming the perfect society. Thank you very much. To become the perfect and complete society. A society that could be heralded as the example for mankind. The other way is to uproot evil at its source, especially when that evil is the evil that blocks the ability to grow as a society. And that evil is one which shackles the intellect, shackles the morality. And so, without having unlocked that first key, which locks the intellect and locks the spirituality, there cannot be any growth itself. And so, in the Meccan society, the aspect of shirk and believing in a God that was created by their own hands was that thing that shackled the intellect and the ability of that community to move forward. Yesterday, we started our discussions on how to liberate this world and the ways in which you and I need to extract from the Holy Thaqalain. We stated that the very first and primary aspect of this world that we need to look at in order to make it a more balanced and equal world is the structure of the world itself. We stated that human development over a period of 6 million years until to date has evolved the various forms of government from tribal societies that were governed by their own chiefs, eventually to this globalized society of countries and nation states. There are 207 nation states in the world today, or 207 sovereign states in the world today. 193 of them are registered with the United Nations. How have we arrived at this? We mentioned that from 1648 there was a peace treaty known as the Treaty of Westphalia. And we live in what is known as the Westphalian Order, meaning that we have division of borders which provide territories for the different countries that we have throughout the world. This thing of the Westphalian Order is not divine. It's not instituted by God. It is not a law of physics that you and I are bound to follow. This is a social construct that doesn't make it valid, it doesn't make it perfect, it doesn't make it enduring. We have created it, and therefore we are capable of removing it, should we so wish, as a society or as the world itself. And so when you have nation states, you have consequences with those particular nation states. The first thing is that when you think you belong to one country, you now stop from considering yourself as a global citizen. You now consider yourself solely to be a citizen of that particular country, which means you are less likely to care for the rest of the world. Because immediately you are constrained in your thinking. Someone has imposed upon you the way in which you should think. Your loyalty lies within the borders that have been created. Those borders are very arbitrary. They can be expanded, they can be contracted, they can be wiped out because they were put there in the first place. This isn't a law of physics. And so, as a result of this nature that makes a human being think only about one set of people, you become very selfish. Think about that. How often we hear in the debates, especially now with the presidential debates in this country, how often you will see the statement, what's right for the American people is this. America is the greatest country in the world, and therefore we should do this. Now here, the statement ignores the rest of the world, the other 7 billion people, and the needs of 7 billion people. It acknowledges the needs of 330 million people. Islam is a religion for mankind. Our Prophet is given the title Rahmatan lil Alameen. He is a mercy for mankind, not Rahmatan lil Arab, or the Arab community, or the Bedouin community, or one locality of people. Rahmatan lil Alameen. The A'imma alayhimus salam are for mankind, and therefore the people of Islam must be for mankind. But through the exploitation that comes with nation states, we have forgotten that, and we have become divided and conquered by other people who wish to exploit us and use us for our own lands and our own resources and our own purposes. We have become beguiled. We have fallen into the trap of those people who wish to divide us. The nation state seeks to exploit the other, has to weaponize against the other, has to look after its own insular interests. And this is the problem with the nation state, because it does not represent human values. The values of the state are based within its own aspirations and not the aspirations of the world. If it can destroy the other in order to exceed its own aspirations, it will do so. True or not? How often we see the countries do that in order to look after its own interests. A country will destroy the other world so long as it can use strength, force, and employ its own government. And so this cannot be a befitting way for you and I to live. And it cannot be in accordance with Islamic ideals. We mentioned yesterday certain Islamic ideals from the Holy Quran and from the corpus of the Ahadith. For example, we mentioned, first and foremost, that the philosophy of religion is to elevate human society together, not to divide. It is to heal the divides, not to create the divides. Every prophet has been given one sharia, the same sharia. The Quran says, شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحٌ وَمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ. We have given you the sharia, just like we gave it to Nuh and to Ibrahim and to Musa and to Isa. That sharia is أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. Establish the religion, the noble way of living, and do not be divided therein. Another hadith comes to us from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, where he says, "Ma ummirat al-buldan bimithli adl," that the nations, the countries, the lands cannot flourish unless and until there is justice within those lands. So long as we have a world that exploits one over the other, destroys one over the other, there cannot be that balance of justice within the world. And so you and I, again, are required to think about this. The next verse that we gave yesterday says, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. Mankind was one people. But through our differences, we created our divisions. The beginning was one, the end will be one, under a global governance of the awaited Savior of humanity, Al-Mahdi alayhi salam. If this is the case, our middle should also aim to be one people. How interesting the Shia is. We say that the Prophet was infallible. Al-Mahdi is infallible, and therefore the Imams between them must be infallible. If the world was one, the ending is one, yet we have Muslims that want to champion nation states, champion their monarchical systems, champion their dictatorial systems, and so on and so forth. It doesn't make sense how we have been manipulated and beguiled by the rest of the world. And so here we came to a conclusion. And yesterday's conclusion was to understand an important premise. And that was how Islam considers living with other people. And we stated that in the city of Medina, there was the Medinan constitution, which included Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and the Muslims as to how they are supposed to live. In the 40-point document, the first point from Rasulullah was, anyone who signs up to this constitution is part and parcel of the Muslim Ummah. How Rasulullah considers the other and how he looks at everyone under one banner. And then we looked at the famous lines from Du'a Iftitah, which gives us how Islam divides people. We see how it brings people together, but then it also must recognize that there's a division between people. How does it divide people? Allahumma inna narghabu ilayka fi dawlatin karima tu'izzu biha al-islam wa ahla wa tudhillu biha al-nifaqa wa ahla. Now, nifaq, this hypocrisy, the people of hypocrisy, and its like and its people. Nifaq is actually a Muslim, isn't it? A munafiq is a Muslim. It's someone who outwardly believes, but inwardly hates, inwardly seeks to destroy. Which means that it's the characteristics of nifaq and its people, irrespective of what faith you belong to. You can have Muslim nifaq, you can have Jew nifaq, Christian nifaq, because it's a characteristic of outwardness and inwardness. And then you have Islam wa ahla. You have Islam and its people. Those people who are Muslim, who submit to the Islamic tenets, those people of faith and good deeds. You can have a Christian who is faithful to God and has good deeds. You can have a Jew who is faithful and good deeds. Therefore, the division that is processed in Islam is those who uphold values against those who uphold the values of nifaq. And that is the division that Islam seeks to place. We, unfortunately, have people who try to divide between black and white. We have people who try to divide between Muslim and Christian, Muslim and Jew, Sunni and Shia. Actually, the world isn't divided in these ways. The world isn't supposed to be divided by nation states. Our religion tells us we divide by Islam wa ahla wa nifaq wa ahla. And if only we could understand this, our mentality and the way in which we would view people would be closer to that of how Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam viewed people. Now, inshallah, we need to move the discussion forward. These were some of our principles in understanding the way Islam seeks for us to be envisioning the world and what you and I should champion. And now we want to talk about the process of that movement. And that goes in two stages. The first is to strengthen international institutions for the end goal of global governance. And so we've gone from theory, and now we want to go to application and understand how that process takes place over a number of decades and the way in which you and I, through our institutions of school, university, business, and through talking with people and reframing the world in a more God-centric concept, a more just concept, can engage in those dialogues with people and at least champion these ideas so that, inshallah, they do not take so long, but that movement towards a just world can begin. There is the institution, and then there is the movement to the global government. It has always fallen upon the Muslim, and now certain ideologies, to champion these sorts of ideas. And so, who can we target to have these sorts of discussions with? What we want is for people to recognize the movement from sovereign statehood to global statehood, from national security to global security, from national ideology and national identity to global identity. The first is those people of faith, because, as we stated yesterday, those who are monotheistic believe in a human savior. The human savior differs in terms of his name, but his goal is always identical. For example, you and I may believe his name is Al-Mahdi ibn Hassan al-Askari, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif. Another Muslim may consider him to be Al-Mahdi, but not necessarily Ibn Hassan al-Askari. A Christian will believe in Jesus. Some of them will say Son of God, some will say Christ, and so on and so forth. But isn't it the same goal and outcome of all of these different messianic figures? Don't they want peace, justice, equilibrium on this world? Which means there must be centrality of leadership, which means there must be the removal of inequality. And so it is very strange that the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew has been co-opted into somehow championing nation states. It should be that we all want the same goal. How we get there, we can get there, but we want the same thing. We should be espousing the same values. The issue is that you and I forget these values. It is the enemy that wishes to divide both the Muslim and the Christian and the Jew. Think about this closely and think about the value of when human beings come together and who tries to benefit from division. Let me give you one example and think about this for yourself. The Iranian Revolution under the hand of Imam al-Khomeini, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. And next door in Iraq, we had, for example, His Eminence Ayatollah Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. Imagine for a minute, if Shaheed al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, had managed to overthrow Saddam al-Tikriti, la'natullahi alayh. Think about that for a minute. What might he, Shaheed al-Sadr, have tried to establish? Now, I don't mean it in terms of wilayat al-faqih or anything like that. I'm talking about the society and the breaking of the boundaries, a just society, Shia working together from Iran and Iraq. Who would have benefited by those two countries working together? And who sought to stop that from happening? And how did they seek to stop that from happening? I probably don't need to go into history right now. You can imagine who did that and why they did that. The fear, and who supported Saddam in trying to stop that from happening. Who gave the money? Who gave the weapons? You can figure that out for yourself or just do a Google search. But here you see the point, that had Shaheed al-Sadr managed to achieve his goals in working with someone like Imam al-Khomeini, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhima, or whoever it was, what would have happened to those countries? Think about today and the fear Saudi Arabia has, and rightly so. On either side of them, you have Yemen and you have Bahrain. On one side, there is a revolution bubbling up. On another side, there is a revolution that is bubbled up. In the middle, there is oppression within Saudi Arabia. Can you imagine what that region might have looked like or might look like with a slightly different outcome to what is currently prevailing? Bahrain needed Saudi tanks to roll in order to stop the revolution, crush it with an iron fist. Right now in Yemen, more than half the country is starving in a humanitarian disaster because of the jets of occupied Arabia. And even only 2 nights ago, we saw 5 Shias in Qatif being killed. What would happen now? Just think about these things. Iran and Iraq merged, worked together. Bahrain, Saudi, Yemen, one working collaboration. How might that region differ? You can immediately see when people come together, there can be great collaboration between people. Who is it that is willing and trying to divide and conquer? The enemies of Islam. Why then do we keep to these very nationalistic identities when we realize that the moment we work together, that is the outcome and the end that we are seeking in the first place? How Muslims have been brainwashed into waving these little national flags, thinking this is Islam. Hey, heart, honestly. Now here, we have to understand that when we talk about these concepts and we talk about these wonderful ideas that are very important, we can call upon Muslims, Christians, and Jews to partake in these ideas because this is the end goal of their religion itself anyway, number one. Number two, we also need to call upon the left wing. The right wing represents nationalism and division. In the United Kingdom, or in England in specific, there is a new trend, and it is specific that if you have an English flag, yes, the red cross in between, the St. George's cross, or you have the British flag in your window, in your house, it specifically means that you are a racist. That's what it represents today. So you know, if you walk down the street as a non-white person, for example, that if I walk down the street and I see that English flag in someone's car or on someone's window, I know what it represents. It means national identity. We want to exclude other people. There is movements. For example, just yesterday, it's a tiny movement in comparison, but it's picking up this right-wing nationalism. For example, only a couple of days ago, there was a march outside a mosque in England where hundreds of people gathered for the purpose of demonstrating against Islam and demanding that the government kick out every Muslim from Britain. This is prevalent. So the right wing is having its movement, but the left wing has not. It has not kept pace with its communitarian ideals. The right wing has become more right, and it's dragged the left towards the center and towards the right. The left wing should be championing communitarian ideals. The left wing should be thinking about the world and the globe and the need of the world. But because the right is moving right, the left is being dragged towards the right. It is again upon you and I to illuminate the minds of those individuals and remind those people that they are supposed to be standing for global and communitarian ideals. And so this is something that we can bring in. According to the Quran, very interestingly, our end is to champion global causes anyway, and to think in light of the world's needs anyway. For example, in Surah Zilzal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا وَأَخْرَجَتِ الْأَرْضُ أَثْقَالَهَا وَقَالَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا لَهَا. You see, at the end of time, when that great zalzala takes place, by the way, zilzal here is both literally an earthquake and also the metaphoric zilzal of trial and tribulation. When those trials and tribulations happen, mankind says, Ma laha, what's going on here? Together mankind wakes up. And so again, it tells us about our destination as to where we need to be going. Now, we want to divide the discussion now into our 3 points. Number one, we want to discuss in particular about this topic, about how there is a need for a globalized society, 1. 2, then we want to understand how this form takes place of this movement, and then the outcome of global governance, whereby there is equilibrium and justice amongst the world's nations. The first thing for us is to say, we cannot have a global government unless we are truly a globalized society. Which means that this idea could not always have taken place. It needs, as a prerequisite, for us to truly be a globalized society. And that has only come about recently, hasn't it? Only recently have we had the ability to cross the world in a few hours. Only in recent years have we had the ability to see what's happening on the other side of the world. Only in recent years have we had globalized trade between all the different corners of the world. The Quran has always predicted about a globalized society. Has always predicted, and this is the miraculous nature of the Quran, that it tells us we're going to get there anyway. And only once we get a globalized society can we begin to think about moving from localized government to centralized government for the entire world. 2 verses I want you to think about. The first one is about Hajj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predicted that Muslims will come to Hajj from all the corners of the world. When Ibrahim alayhi salam makes the Kaaba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا وَعَلَى كُلِّ ذَامِرٍ يَأْتُونَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ. Announce Hajj, and you will see people flocking to it on every mode of transport from every corner of the world. Subhanallah. Here, Ibrahim alayhi salam wasn't told, announce Hajj, and you will have the Bedouin societies of the tribes around you come. You will have people from all the corners of the world coming, which proves at one point we will have a globalized world. Phenomenal. Number 1. Number 2, an interesting verse in chapter number 10, Surah Yunus, verse number 24. And this verse is a profound verse, and in fact, according to some of our mufassirun, is a sign of the end of time. A globalized world is one of the signs of the end of time. Now, normally when you and I look for the alamat al-dhuhur, we normally look within the ahadith, don't we? Very rarely will you look within the Quran, but when you look within the Quran, you will find everything you need. Tibyanan li kulli shay. It makes clear everything and talks about everything, including a globalized world. Verse number 24. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إنما مثل الحياة الدنيا كماء أنزلناه من السماء فأخلط به نبات الأرض مما يأكل الناس. Surely that this life, the world, this life of the world is like the rain that comes from the sky. And what does this rain do? فَاخْتَلَطَ بِهِ نَبَاتُ الْأَرْضِ. And it brings about the herbage from this world. Now the Mufassirun say that this part of the verse is talking about how the days and the seasons come and go. The world is continuing. Clouds come, rain drops, earth grows, herbage grows. This continues in a cycle, cyclical. Mimma ya'kulun nas. And this is eaten by people. Wala na'am. And by the cattle. Hatta. Until when? Meaning, this cycle of the world continuing. Earth, rain, cattle, people. It will continue. Until hatta إذا أخذت الأرض زخرفها وزينت وظن أهلها أنهم قادرون عليها. This cycle of the world continuing will continue until when? Until the earth puts on its adornments and is beautified. وزينت. Think about that. When the whole world is adorned with its beauties. Go to New York, go to Dubai, and you will see the beauties of this world coming up. When you see those photos from NASA and from those space stations where the whole earth at night is adorned and lit up with electricity, وَزَيَّنَتْ, and how the whole earth is alive. At that point, when the earth altogether is lit up and beautified, what happens? وَظَنَّ أَهْلُهَا أَنَّهُمْ قَادِرُونَ عَلَيْهَا. People will think that they have power over the world. Now think about this very closely, brothers and sisters. Did Fir'aun think that he had power over the whole world? He didn't. He think he had localized power. Did someone as arrogant as Muawiyah or Yazid think that they had power over the whole world? They didn't. In the court of Yazid, la'natullahi alayh, when the head of Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam was presented, there was a representative from Rome who said, we do not treat our prophets with anything but respect and love. Look at how you treat the grandson of Rasulullah. He didn't think he had power over the whole world. Otherwise, why would there be an ambassador from the Roman Empire? Only when you have a globalized society can you have people that think that they can pull the strings and puppet the entire world. أَنَّهُمْ قَادِرُونَ عَلَيْهَا. Think about it today. Do you have people that think that they can pull the strings over the whole world and manipulate entire countries into things? George W. Bush, Rupert Murdoch, Benjamin Netanyahu, whoever. We have individuals that think that they have power over the world, that can manipulate the world. You can't have that until you have a globalized society. When you have a localized society, you have localized leadership. The Quran predicts a globalized society. When this happens, when people think that they have power, when they have such arrogance to think that they can control the way people think and the way people act in the world, the financial systems, the militarized systems of the world, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Ataha amruna laylan aw nahara. At that point, our authority, our command comes to the world by day or by night. Who is that authority? Who is that individual that brings the command of God by night or by day? None other than the awaited Savior, Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. And so the Quran has always predicted a globalized world. And so these ideas of global governance can only take place as in like how the Quran had predicted that one day we become a globalized society. Now, if you recall, in our philosophy, we said two things. We said that Rasulullah moved institutions forward because there are times when you cannot just change something altogether, because you have to understand people's mindset and weaknesses and the way in which they think. Just like you have such right-wing people who love the concept of national identity and wave their little flags and think that that is where power should remain, you will not be able to change them overnight. You have to bring them forward slowly. You have to illuminate their mind. You have to show them why thinking globally is more important than thinking nationally. And so you cannot take people very quickly in this particular notion. Shaheed al-Sadr, if you mention, we said, in his philosophy says, you have to move people incrementally. 30 degrees to 31 degrees, 32 and so on and so forth, to the point of boiling. Here, there is a wonderful scholar by the name of April Carter, and she has written that this notion of a globalized world, she's a leading thinker in international relations and sociology and philosophy, she has written that the world must go through 3 stages of this globalized society in order to come to governance, central global governance. She says the first one is nation states are made and then anarchy happens. There will be rivalry and competition between nation states. The second stage is we will begin to understand the need for cooperation and begin to create common interests and common values. Then the third stage is where order will prevail and transcend through those countries across the entirety of the world. 3 stages. The first one was where nation states are created and there's absolute anarchy. Nation states were created from 1648. Look at what we've had until to date. Just as an example, World War I, World War II, Gulf War, until now. Syria and what is taking place in Syria and in Iraq is the perfect example of absolute disorder and chaos through nation states. Why? Because you have so many different players, so many different actors using Iraq and Syria for their own gain. I probably don't need to list them. You can probably understand. But what is the end goal of these individuals? They want to divide Syria and divide Iraq. Divide Iraq into 3. You end up having a Shia state, you end up having a Kurd state, and you end up having a Sunni/ISIS state. And I'm not saying all Sunni are like ISIS, absolutely not. But this is the goal of people. Why? Because once you divide people, then they have to put in more governments, you have to sell them more weapons, and therefore your economy becomes stronger. They have to make allegiances and alliance with certain governments, and then you have your proxy governments and puppets in place. What's the outcome of all this? Think about these things. So here, anarchy is something we have experienced and are experiencing. We're definitely in that stage. The second stage by Professor April Carter says nations will begin to cooperate and create common interests between each other. We're definitely at that stage, where now the world is beginning to understand that it needs to work together in order to overcome certain particular challenges. Let me explain. For example, up until 1945, generally speaking, there was very little intrusion into nation states. Nation states look after themselves and govern the way they want to. After World War II, there was a massive shift towards having to understand world policies and how we end up doing something which affects the rest of the world, and how one country and its decision-making process can affect the entirety of the world. Germany, in 1945, in its own unilateral decision, ended up bringing other countries in and ended up creating a world war that even went into Africa, even went into the Middle East. And so we realized that we need to create common values and common interests amongst themselves. What do we have now? We have international law that prevails. We have the International Criminal Court that prevails. We have, for example, interestingly, the EU, the European Union. Although I may be a British citizen, I can freely travel amongst all European Union countries. I can move to any European Union country. I can work in any European Union country. In fact, I can vote, and every European Union citizen votes for the European Parliament. What have we been talking about? Global Parliament. In Europe, by and large, it's already been achieved. It's not pie in the sky. Europe looks after European issues. Yes, countries still look after its own, and that's no problem. You need localized law. But Europe has expanded to understand that you can have international frameworks from amongst each other. This process of thinking continues to change. Here, we have already reached this particular stage. Our goal is now to think about how we move to the last stage, which is order, which transcends throughout the entirety of the world. People will say, it's too difficult. We can't do it. How can you have something that transcends across the entire world, where we look after each other and we have equality amongst the entirety of the world? I'd like to tell you something that I would like you to think about. Mankind is capable of anything we want to achieve. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this in the Holy Quran. He says, Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal-insi in istata'tum an tanfudhu min aqtar as-samawati wal-ard. O gathering of the jinn and the ins, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed our capacity in similitude to that of the jinn. If you wish to break through to the regions of the heavens, then do it. There's no stopping you, but you should do it bis-sultan, with authority, with great power you will need to be able to achieve these goals. Mankind has achieved so much. When we want to achieve something, we can easily achieve it. When we don't want to achieve it, we find reasonings not to. Did you know, right now, scientists are working on a nanochip that goes into the brain that has the equivalent amount of information as Google, that will go into the brain, that when you think of anything that you need, you will download the information from your brain. Think about that for a second. It makes sitting through those pesky exams quite null and void, doesn't it? What's the square root of, there we go. Yes? I want to learn how to ride a motorbike. Do I have to sit through driving lessons? There it is. And I just do it. It almost sounds like the Matrix, doesn't it? But they're working on it. Scientists are working on it. They plan in the next 30 years to be able to achieve that. We are now about to conquer Mars. Mars. We already have individuals that have planned to live on Mars and to be the first community to capture another planet and live on it. And you're telling me we're planning on getting to another world we can't yet even learn to govern our own? This is the issue. When we want to achieve something, we can achieve something as humankind. We choose not to achieve, that is down to selfishness. You know, flying here, I'm petrified of flying. This is true. I have a phobia of flying. I'm not a comfortable flyer. But although I do fear going down, yes, there's one thing I don't fear, and that's two planes going like this. And I tell you what, when you fly, I would suggest, by and large, that you don't fear two planes hitting each other. True or not? It's not something that really goes through your mind, is it? No one sits there and fears that. Why not? There are tens of thousands of planes in the sky at any one time, crisscrossing the entire world. There are crafts taking off into the sky as drones. There are crafts going out as satellites into the world that we don't even realize every single day. Yet we never fear or hear about two planes colliding. Why? Because the world came together and said, we need to create a system of safety for each other. And they did it. Immediately. They did it. They put all the mechanisms, all the technology, all the money into doing it. Why? Because we shared a common value that said, when we traverse and crisscross these skies, we need safety to be guaranteed for those people. We can do it if we want to. When we choose not to, we fail because of our own selfish needs. It's as simple as that, I promise you. I promise you. We're currently experiencing the first stage, where we have anarchy between some states. We are experiencing the second stage, whereby we are learning to cooperate globally as a society. There is now the need for us to go to the third stage, and this happens with two things. One, this is called global public policy. In academia, there is a new study, brand new study called global public policy. Google it and read for 5 minutes and you'll love it. It's very simple. Currently, we have certain types of institutions. We have, for example, the nation state, and then we have the international organizations like the United Nations. But even the United Nations needs to get its information from somewhere, doesn't it? It needs someone to drive that policy. And there are certain globalized challenges that we are all facing. For example, global warming. It's not localized to any one place. The management of natural resources. It's a globalized issue, isn't it? The management of water. If you live out in LA, you're definitely seeking management of water, aren't you? Yes, this is a transnational issue. Smog and environment, it's a transnational issue. Fishing stocks, it's a transnational issue. Did you know the United Nations a few years ago released a paper that said at our current level of fishing, all fishing stocks in this world will be completely depleted by 2050. If you like fish, you best start eating it now. But that would actually cause more of a problem, because if you all start buying fish, more fishing will take place, and it's a problem, isn't it? Yes? We have international problems. We have globalized problems. Now, there is a place, a state, a space in the world above nation state, above United Nations, where scientists, researchers, academics, people who create global policy for things like global warming, for things like military safety, for things like security, where they come together. And this is called global public policy. Our duties as Muslims is A, to be involved in those areas so that we drive good policy. And B, for us who cannot directly be there, is to champion the ideas of global public policy. And 3, that global public policy brings the world up together. Islam's principles are that the world should not be where one locality moves forward at the sufferance of another. Remember this famous hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. towards the end of his life in his khilafat in Kufa. As we know, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam had direct responsibility of Baytul Mal. One day, as he's walking in the streets, he sees an elderly man. This man is destitute. He's homeless, he has tattered clothes, he has no food, and he's begging. And he asks, who are you? Tell me your story. Not just give him money, sit with him, talk to him, understand his plight. Look at the humanity. And so the man tells him, I am such and such a person. I am Christian, and I was always with you from many years before. Amir al-Mu'mineen immediately grabs his companions, says, go towards Bayt al-Mal, bring me this amount, and immediately gives it to the Christian man. He scolds his companions and says, when we were building the Muslim Ummah, this Christian man was working with us, helping to create the Muslim Ummah. Now the Muslim Ummah has become strong. Do we forget about this man? And immediately writes for him his monthly stipend. One of the most famous hadith that we often cite about the justice of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That the policy that is made is for everyone, and that global policy looks after the needs of the entire world and doesn't bring forward one particular group, one particular nation. In fact, in Islam, the concept of global public policy has been instituted by all of our imams. Because all of our imams at some point definitely were not caliphs of the Muslim Ummah. In fact, most of them weren't. Only Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was caliph, and only Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam for a few months was caliph, and only Imam al-Rida alayhi salam was heir apparent to the caliph. The rest have worked outside of the government, correct or not? And so the government, the state, must have advisors on top of it in order to help bring policy forward. Listen to this hadith from our fifth Imam, Muhammadin al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. The caliph of the time, he got into a problem with the Roman Empire, very famously. The Roman Empire had decided to make new coins. And those coins had on it the stamp of Jesus being the Son of God. And so the caliph had decided that he would not want to use these particular coins in the Muslim Ummah because it was talking about shirk. And so the Roman Empire said, we will make new coins that speak abusively about the name of Rasulullah, and we will spread this everywhere. Meaning, now the name of Rasulullah is being brought down amongst the Muslims. We will mint new coins. Because of this threat that was made by the Roman Empire to the Muslim Empire, the Caliph was stuck. How do I deal with this? They're threatening to bring down the name of Rasulullah. He asked all of his advisors. None of them have answers. Eventually, they say, bring Muhammadin al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says, it's no problem. Let me advise the Muslim Ummah, the state, as to how to react to this trial, this crisis. He says, instead of being reliant upon the coins from the Roman Empire, let us for the first time mint our own coins. Put on one side, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and on the other side, put Surat al-Ikhlas. This will stop the reliance of the Roman coins in the Muslim Ummah, and we will create our own coins, making us independent from the Roman Empire. Do not worry about their threat. God will protect the name of Rasulullah, and they will not be able to mint anything against Rasulullah. Until today, in the British Museum in London, in the historic section, that coin is present, lives there, and on it it says, This was created and minted under the advisement of Muhammad ibn Ali al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Our imams have always been advisors to drive policy, even though they haven't been in government itself. Today, that place is being made to drive policy for the whole world, called global public policy. Remember what Umar said, Umar al-Khattab. Had it not been for Ali, Umar would have been destroyed. Lawla aliyin lahalak al-Umar. Why? Because every time the caliph got into some problem, who was it that was guiding? Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so here we see that if we can strengthen these global institutions that drive policy, eventually the world will realize that you need to have a central place for thinkers, politicians to come together to create globalized laws for all of the challenges that we are facing. That a world that reduces inequality, that clears up the air, that brings about justice within the world. And that is how we drive the world towards global governance, whereby no longer is the power within certain nation states to do as they please. It becomes centralized, truly a globalized society that cares for one another. If you look at Hussein ibn Ali and the way in which he cared for the other, and in his own army, his companions were of diverse backgrounds. He had Christians in his army. He had slaves in his army. He had the black, the white, the brown in his army. Because, as he says in his famous saying, falsehood can buy many friends, but truth is always few in number. We have 72 with us, but the number isn't important. It was in here that made the value of that army. Of all the companions, the beloved was the beloved Habib. Habib ibn Madahir, who was a child of a similar age to Hussein ibn Ali when he was a child, who followed Hussein ibn Ali around like Ali ibn Abi Talib followed Rasulullah around. In Nahj al-Balagha, we have that famous line where Amir al-Mu'mineen describes his childhood. He says that I used to follow Rasulullah like a baby camel follows its mother. Ali ibn Abi Talib Rasulullah used to feed me with his own hands. Habib ibn Madahir used to take from Hussein ibn Ali, not the food for the mouth, but the food for the soul. One day, Rasulullah brings Madahir, the father of Habib, and sits Habib down and strokes him and cuddles him and venerates him. The father, Madahir, says, Ya Rasulullah, why do you do this? Why do you venerate my son, my young child, so much? He says, wherever Hussein goes, Habib goes. And I see that not only is he following Hussein, but that wherever Hussein's feet go, he takes the dust and he places it upon his face. He places it upon his eyes in order to take the shifa'ah of that dust. This was the love of Habib ibn Madahir for his master Hussein ibn Ali. Habib moved to Kufa with Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he was a great and prominent companion. When Muslim ibn Aqil and Muslim ibn Awsaja was killed, certain companions tried their best to escape, and they suffered the very same consequence of that of people like Muslim ibn Hani ibn Urwa and Muslim ibn Aqil. Companion after companion after companion in Kufa had beheaded, had their body thrown from the tower, had their feet tied to the back of a horse and dragged through the streets of Kufa as a warning to the Shia. Amongst those who wished to get out was Habib ibn Madahir. It is said that Hussein ibn Ali was in the plains of Karbala and preparing each and every one of his companions for the day of Ashura. The narration says that he distributed spears to every single one and weapons and swords to every single one of his companions. But there was one spear that was waiting there. They asked him and said, "Why have you not distributed this last spear?" He said, "I am waiting for my guest to come, and this spear is set and waiting for my guest." Who is your guest? It is Habib ibn Madahir that is going to come. It is said that he writes a letter and he dispatches an individual who secretly enters into the city of Kufa. He comes to the house and delivers the letter. The narration says that as he is sitting for breakfast or eating his meal with his wife and his son, he opens this message from his master Hussein, and Habib begins to read it with tears flowing from his eyes. He looks at it and says, "This is a call of help from my master Hussein." The call of Hal min Nasirin Yansurana wasn't just on the plains of Karbala, but was to reach the hearts of every true companion of Hussein, from Habib until today. Habib looks at this letter, tears flow from his eyes. His wife looks at him and says, "Oh Habib, what are you waiting for? Your master Hussein has called you. Go towards him." He says that famous line and says, "I will dye my beard with my blood in defense of Hussein ibn Ali." He calls his servant and says to him, "Take the horse outside the city boundaries and wait for me. If anyone stops you, tell them that your horse is grazing. Wait for me and I will come." It is said that at Asr time, in the heat, as people gathered in Masjid Kufa, he left and snuck out of the city limits. He goes towards his horse. As he approaches, the khutaba say that he hears a voice coming. He hears his servant saying to his horse, "O horse, if Habib does not come, I will ride you to the defense of Hussein." Tears are flowing down the eyes of Habib. He sends his salutation to his servant. He says, "O servant, you have been my servant until today. I have always given you orders. Now I free you from my servitude. Go back to the house. Free yourself from this city and the rule of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad." With tears in his eyes, his servant looks at him and says, "Oh my master Habib, all my life I have served you. I have tried to serve the Ahlul Bayt. Now I have an opportunity to serve the son of Fatima, and you are freeing me from that duty. I beg you, take me with you. Allow me to ride on this horse with you. I will walk to Karbala if I have to." And so they both go. It is said, as Hussein is waiting inside the tents, he says, "Go and collect my guest." There is a tumult outside the tents. People are gathering outside the tents. Who has come? It is none other than Habib ibn Madahir. The narration states that prior to the arrival of Habib ibn Madahir, Sayyidah Zainab had a heartbreaking moment with her brother. She looks towards her brother and says, "Oh my brother, dear Akhi, oh my brother, all I see in these days building up to the 10th of Muharram is thousands of soldiers for Yazid coming from Kufa, coming from Damascus. There are so many people baying for your blood. You only have 71 people with you. Is there no one to come and help you, O Aba Abdullah? There are thousands out there willing to tear your flesh, your limb falling from limb. Who is coming to your aid? It is said that Hussein looks at his sister and says, "Oh sister, fear not. There is one man that is going to come. Habib, my beloved, is going to come." Oh Shia, look at Habib, because Hussein is making one man the equivalent of tens of thousands against the army of Yazid. Oh Zainab, thousands are baying for my blood, but do not worry. There is one man who is coming, and that is Habib. When he comes, there is a tumult, there is joy, there are people celebrating the coming of Habib. The tents, in the ladies, they are asking what is happening. It is said that Fizza inquires from the men, what is happening outside, that people are celebrating. She is told, Habib, the beloved of Hussein, has arrived. Fizza turns towards Sayyida Zainab and says, they are celebrating the arrival of Habib. Listen to the response of Sayyida Zainab. Zainab responds by saying, send my salutations upon Habib. Habib hears these words and cries, who is Habib to receive the salutations of Sayyida Zainab? Tonight, Sayyida Zainab is all alone in Damascus. We are here for you, Sayyida Zainab, and we want you to send us your salutations one day, that we will help Hussein, we will help Mahdi, and we want your salutations the way in which you saluted Habib ibn Madahir. Habib loves Hussein so much. He says to him consistently throughout the day, please allow me to enter into the battlefield. Allow me to be the one who gives his life. Hussein responds, oh Habib, since my childhood you have always been there to give me comfort. If you are taken from me, the heart of Hussein will be torn to pieces. Please do not go into the battlefield. He continues. One narration says, he says to his master Hussein, oh Hussein, please allow me to enter into the battlefield. Hussein says, wait, after Dhuhr I will allow you. He says, no, I wish to pray my Salatul Dhuhr behind Rasulullah in heaven. I no longer wish to live in this world. Hussein says, oh my beloved, go. How can I stop you when you say something like this? How can I stop you when you wish to pray behind Rasulullah? Go into the battlefield. He enters and he says, I am Habib. I am the beloved of Hussein. Do you know whose blood you are trying to spill? Do you know which sanctity you are tearing? Do you not know that he is the grandson of Rasulullah? Do you not know that he is the son of Fatima az-Zahra? He enters into the battlefield and he enters like a raging lion. They strike him down with swords and with spears and with arrows. If all of the other companions tore Hussein's heart, can you imagine what he is feeling when he hears the swords striking against each other? When he knows that in a minute his beloved is about to be struck down. It is said that one person cowardly comes behind him, strikes upon the head of Habib. Habib falls towards the floor. They begin to strike him and cut his body. He calls out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah. Salutations be upon you. He rushes out to visit his beloved. He takes his head upon his shoulder and he dies in the arms of Hussein. The narrations tell us, of all the shuhada, all of the shuhada had their heads severed. But the first of all the shuhada to have their heads severed was that of Habib ibn Madahir. And Habib's head was not only severed, his head was not placed upon a spike like the rest of the shuhada. His head was tied to the neck of a horse. That this horse was leading all of the other horses. They were leading them through the 20 cities. Oh brothers, can you imagine that scene? There you have the head tied to a horse. And now it is said that the young son of Habib ibn Madahir by the name of Qasim. Qasim is a young boy. Qasim is said that every time he would enter into a city, he would run to the front of all those horses and he would look at the head of his father. It is said that one day as they entered into the cities, one man who was leading that caravan, he comes towards him and looks into the eyes of the Yazidi soldier. He says to him, oh child, go away. He continues to look. Oh child, what do you want? Why are you looking into my eyes? He says, I am looking because this is the head of my father, Habib. I want you to give me his head so I can bury the head of my father. The narration tells us that Habib looks into the eyes of his son Qasim as if to say, Oh Qasim, you are worried about my head. You want to bury my head. Look at the head of Hussein that is upon a spear. Why do you worry about my head? Seek for the head of the grandson of Rasulullah. Because in a moment Yazid will be striking it with a stick. In a minute Yazid will be throwing a cup of wine upon the head of Abu Abdullah. Oh Qasim, take that head from the spear and bury that head instead of my head. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.